transaction, to come and speak with more authority and experience. So I was thrilled when he said he would come up here, come down here actually, and address y'all. So with that, I want to introduce Mr. O'Connor and thank him profusely for coming down to Lake Worth and helping us out. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you so much. And also because it's a joint work session, just wave me down if you want to ask a question. Can you start, if you wouldn't mind, telling us about Vero's system, how many customers, how many megawatts, just to give us all a little bit of background about the similarities and differences?
Okay, we have a system of about 34,000 customers. We have transmission, distribution, and generation on our system, similar to Lake Worth. We have maintained the system at very high standards over the years. We have very good response time for outages, and we have also built a lot of duplicated parts of our system in the system itself, so our reliability is not really that much of an issue. Our generation facility is over 50 years of age and does lack the efficiency that new generation facilities would actually have in today's marketplace. So it is outdated, has issues. It also has an issue in the fact that the community itself doesn't like the location. It happens to be on the river, which is a prime piece of property, and it happens to be on a major thoroughfare in our community, which makes it, in some people's eyes, those of us in the electric utility don't quite view it that way, but the fact of the matter is it's not the most picturesque thing that you will see coming from the island back over onto the mainland from in the city of Vero Beach. So we had that as an issue as well. But our system is, the 34,000 customers is our basis, and it is a system that has pretty good reliability.
Any commissioner questions for UAB members? Commissioner Rosso?
Two questions to start. First of all, have you hired a company, or what are you doing to actually evaluate what your utility is worth?
Let me give you a little background. I have been with the city of Vero Beach just right at 2 years. When I was hired, GAI had already been employed to do a value assessment of the system itself. It's a well-respected, well-renowned company in the state of Florida. They had been in the process of doing that evaluation when I came on board. I'm not a big placing a value such as that on. I've had experience in another community. I worked in Dover, Delaware, which we went through a similar situation there. And trying to place a value on your system can be done in multiple ways. For example, GAI did it from 3 different perspectives. But we got down to counting the nuts and bolts, the screwdrivers, and the value of a utility pole. That really isn't a marketplace, in my opinion, a marketplace value system. There are other methods by which you can use, for example, the value of the meter. What is that value of the meter going forward, and using that as a value system? The issue really comes down when you put a value, especially as a public entity, you're going to place expectations as to what it is you plan to get out of that system. I think you need to be a little conservative and reserved in that area and think about what it is that you want to do. What are the areas that you want to explore? If selling the system is the key, and I used the example when I met the mayor a little earlier, it's like selling a house. And it really gets down to that basic, in my opinion, of what you're doing. If I've been offered a job in New York City and I've got to be out of my house in 30 days, it's one value. If it's I can live in that house for the next year and wait for the right price, it's another value. Those are the type of conditions I think you need to take into consideration. I, for one, would not spend a whole lot of money on counting the number of utility poles, the amount of copper lines you have in your system. I think you need to get to a little bit more basic and then get a parameter of what your value is in the market system. The market system is really sort of a universe, if you look at it that way. If you start putting parameters on the direction you want to go with your utility, those parameters being limitations, which are values. And everything you will do in a transaction such as this has a value.
And before I move on to my next question, you had mentioned that the people put a value on the river because it's actually on the river. Will you be keeping that land and developing it outside of what FP&L is doing?
Well, that's a unique question because in our charter, we have to have a referendum if we sell that land for private sector use. If the power plant is part of our contract, because we have two primary parameters that the city council wants to see addressed in the contract. One is the removal of the plant from the river. The other is we want FP&L rates as we go forward into the future. Removal of the plant is part of that. FP&L under our contract will be responsible for removing the plant and taking it down to the ground. That property comes back to the city. We have the right to use it under city forces, but if we're going to sell it, it has to go to referendum.
Okay. What is your plans for your shortfall? As you know, Lake Worth has a shortfall that we actually bring back into our general fund, and I know you do too. It's not quite as large as ours, but what are your plans for your shortfall?
We're going through that painful process right now, as a matter of fact. You really only have one flexible revenue stream that the city can rely on, that's ad valorem taxes. What we did is we ran some financial models, and I say when we ran it, our finance department did this. We looked at utility taxes, franchise fees that we would collect after the sale of the utility, the ad valorem taxes that would be paid because they would become private assets at that time, so those are revenue streams. Then we also looked at the reduction of our expenses, because a lot of our costs coming back into the city, which is a little over $7 million, were to offset those support services. For example, customer service, meter reading because of the electric utility, also any support for human resources, the city attorney, the city manager, those type of functions. And so we started seeing where we can reduce those costs. So you had the discussion of where would we increase revenues and where would we do the reduction in costs. We're in the process of doing cost reduction, and that's been the direction given by the city council. So we're going to try to get ourselves down to an organizational structure and a price for that organizational structure. Then we will look at revenue.
Commissioner Boyd?
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you're also a partner in either the Stanton or the St. Lucie plants, or maybe both. Is that the case?
We are partners in the Stanton 2, and the St. Lucie.
And how...
Partners is a loose term. We are investors.
Investors, right. And how are you extracting yourselves out of that?
That was our major hurdle. And when you get into the discussion, everybody in the city, all 15,000 plus those who are outside the city, have their direction that they would have taken since we went. But we chose the route of trying to make sure that we had a buyer for our our power contracts. So we worked with FP&L and OUC, OUC being the primary generator, and then the secondary generator was FP&L, and also obviously the partner that we were dealing with in selling of our utility. And so we approached OUC. We knew we had contracts with FMPA as well as OUC. Our supplemental was with OUC. And it took us over a year to try to work through contracts of how to have that transferred. One of the issues is that all of those power supply contracts are financed with tax-free bonds. So it became a major issue as to using tax-free bonds in a private contract. But we feel like we found a way of doing that. OUC, with financial incentives, has agreed to take our power supply contracts. Part of our agreement also, and it's really an agreement between FP&L and OUC, the city is independent of this, FP&L has agreed to purchase power from OUC at their price, FMPA price, which we are referred to as market price, for a minimum of 3 years. Under IRS regulations, that is our interpretation of what would be allowed to do that. So we have paid $20 million to OUC for their supplemental power, and we're paying $34 million for them to take our FMPA power, and then Florida Power and Light has agreed to purchase the power at that cost for a period of 3 years. That is the compact deal in order to get out of those purchase powers.
And so a key piece of it is that OUC, which is not a private utility, but a municipally owned one, can buy it with that constraint on the tax-free.
That is correct.
So if you didn't have OUC, if OUC was independent, you were just working with FP&L, that would not have worked, is that correct?
That is correct. You had to find somebody that would take your power supply contracts. There is a possibility you could have worked out, and it would have been a financial arrangement that would probably be in excess of what we would want to pay in order to buy our way out of those tax-free bonds. But I think that would have been very difficult to do, so this was the most easier way of doing it. But there are other municipals that could have purchased it. For example, we talked about maybe Jacksonville would be interested in it. They're not a member of FMPA, but they are a municipal power supply.
Yeah, I'm, in looking around the country, there are a number of cities that are doing the opposite of what you're in the process of doing or what we are, which is going from being supplied by private utilities to creating their own utilities. And I'm curious, they seem to be doing it, you know, it's obviously it's a major undertaking either way that you're going. What are the main motivations you had for going away from your own utility?
I think that, as I explained earlier, we had really two. One is we did not think we could afford to take down our power plant. Also, our power plant is under contract with OUC, so we're sort of in a double pickle there in the fact that we don't even control the destiny of our gas supply to our power plant because it was in the contract with OUC. But the primary motivation for us, in my opinion, and that expressed, excuse me, by council, has been the competitive price issue. We have not, and I cannot foresee in the foreseeable future that we can compete price-wise with our competitor in our general area, which is Florida Power & Light. And so that price differential, we think that the closest we can get is about 15%. We're 23, 24% differential right now. So it's a price. And I guess it's a philosophical discussion as to should we be in the shoe business if we can't compete with our competitors just because we own the franchise.
Thank you. I guess there's different valuation methods that you were mentioning. A lot of times in business, it's like maybe a ratio of what's the average amount of a bill or consumption per customer. And so how much would another company that buys, they're buying your customer base to generate their own profits out of it. So that's a basis. How would you compare, say, an average bill or a consumption of kilowatts for people that are in the Bureau system?
The return back to the city or the comparison?
Gross cost to the city that's to provide the service and the power and all, and then versus what you...
We have a 6% markup, is what we do, 6%, and that we apply that to all of our utilities. And that has been a guidance from the council since I came there. It used to fluctuate depending on what the budget needs were at the time, but we set a goal that 6% would be our maximum contribution. Now, that doesn't take into consideration the support of the other support services, for example, customer services, human resources, finance, and that kind of stuff. But it's a 6% markup is what we have. And we arrived at that number based on an average, but at the same time is what, in my opinion, was a fair return.
And so that would cover you all think out about $5 million a year toward the general funds?
Between 4 and 5. Yes.
Between 4 and 5.
And our total is somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.
So in that sense, during the sale of this, you didn't have expectations of kind of compensating for that when you pull off the funds in the price you're going to get from FP&L.
No, sir, we did not, because you got to remember that that price was somewhat inflated in the fact that we couldn't be competitive in the marketplace in the selling of our power. So that was, you had to take that into consideration, in my opinion, as to what you're doing when you're buying and selling the utility. Now, from a city's perspective, let me preface this. Every city is different. That's why we have home rule. We have a different makeup of the community as to what their expectations are. I'm speaking only from what the direction that the city of Vero Beach has gone. Now, You know, in some parts of the country, we're very competitive in our price. This would be a totally different discussion. But in our particular situation, we happen to be in the market area of probably one of the more competitive utilities in the entire country.
I have a question. What are you, when we're looking at, can we talk numbers just to give some examples of some of the things that you just mentioned in the last few minutes? Meaning, the sale price.
Sale price that we have right now is $111.5 million.
Okay, so 111.5, and you talked about paying out to get rid of some of those entitlements that you had. What did that cost?
$34 million would go to get us out of the FMPA entitlements, and $20 million is out of the OUC supplemental entitlements, and we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $49 million worth of debt service that would have to be paid. Now, in our contract, we get to keep all the remaining fund balances in the electric utility. So what we're saying there is that any bills that go out, that revenue comes back to the city, as well as reserve pockets that we have, that we've set up, for example, capital projects and stuff like that, that we don't necessarily, we would not do because we wouldn't own the utility.
So you walk away with 11 million or 10 million at the, after paying off all those entitlements?
Our goal is 35.
35, with what's left?
Yes.
Okay. And then what is your contribution to your general fund?
The general fund operations between 4 and 5 million.
4 and 5 million. Okay. And what do you charge, what is your business model for moving forward in regards to franchise? And it's 'cause when you
6% franchise, 10% utility. Again, I'm speaking as a city manager, not as an elected official, but that's in our,
What's been
that's in our
discussed.
business model, yes.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Jim, for coming on now. Could you give us a little bit of a context of a time frame? When did this really, the idea of actually selling, really, you know, take traction and go into motion? And when do you foresee the timeline coming to fruition? When do you think it's all gonna?
I can tell you that the discussion on the sale of the electric utility in Vero Beach dates back many, many years. As a matter of fact, it goes back to one of the guys that I used to know, John Little, and he was not able to pull it off. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to outlast him. But anyway, it has been under discussion for many years because of the issues that I discussed. The most recent time frame, I guess, and I would have to turn to Pilar, is probably about 4 years that we've really been active.
It's around 2009.
2009, that they really took an active move in trying to do something. It's only been a couple of years since we've actually had a sales agreement with Florida Power and Light that actually documented what we would do as to the selling of the electric utility, the parameters. And so that sales agreement is what we've been working on. One of the issues that also has come up is the process in which you follow. And ours was that we needed that sales agreement in order to go to FMPA. We knew FMPA was going to be a very tough battle. That's who we have our contractual agreements with. But you had to have some document that you could take and negotiate from in order to start the process in earnest. That's where we are today. How long it will take, I don't really know. I will tell you that I think that if we don't make some major headway between now and January, then we're going to find ourselves in an issue that we're really going to have to address what we're going to do. But our goal is by January of 14 that we will have a major path forward.
Okay, not to put you on the spot, but if you had it to do all over, if your organization, could do it all over again, is there something that you would have done differently? And if so, what is it, and what advice would you give us as we, dip our toe in these waters?
No offense to my council members, but just thinking back as to what I would have done, I think the first thing I would have done is what they did do is hire an attorney to help you understand those challenges that you're going to have. I would have hired an attorney and not a firm. I would have gone and I used the example earlier with the mayor. When I was in Dover, Delaware, we hired an attorney that I had talked to members of the PJM, which were private utilities. I had talked to several co-ops and municipals and talked around the industry to find a name that would crop up that would help us. And I found that. And he was very instrumental in helping us in that process. One of the things that we did in that exercise is that we decided that we didn't want to hire firms. We wanted to hire individuals who may be with firms. We hired an engineer out of R.W. Beck. We did not want to hire R.W. Beck. And so we really put a team together that was specialized. And if I had to do it over again, that's probably what I would have done as opposed to hiring a large firm.
Since your municipality has really said, yes, we're gonna move forward with this idea, we're gonna explore it, we're gonna move forward, can you comment on quantify in any way, shape, or form what that has done for your overall business growth? Is it anything to spur growth in your community? Is it anything to encourage investment? Is there any way that you can tell us that has been a positive or a negative one way or the other for you?
I think it has given some of our businesses optimistic looks as to what's going to happen in the future. There's no question. You take Piper Aircraft, one of our largest customers. I mean, you're talking about $1 million a year in their particular case, and there's no way that we could really compete even in our demand charges with that. So obviously they have a vested interest in watching that. In Piper's case, they have changed their business model because they've gotten a new CEO at the Dover facility, but it really wasn't around electricity, although Simon will tell you that he sort of looks at it as the brightness of the future, having that possibility out there. And I would presume if you went to a lot of our hotels on the beach, probably would tell you the same thing because their meters are pretty heavy. But I think it's a cost component of their business model that really makes a difference. But part of that also is the reliability. And I've had several businesses that are a little concerned that if we go to a larger conglomerate such as Florida Power and Light, what are the response times going to be in Vero Beach? We've been assured, and as a matter of fact, part of our discussions with Florida Power and Light is that at least for the short term, they will have a facility located in the city of Vero Beach, which will be a maintenance facility coming out. And in talking to not only the folks I interface with, but the vice president of Florida Power and Light, they want to make sure that they have that response time that people have become accustomed to. And so it's a double-edged sword. The other little challenge that you have is that people expectations coming back not only to the value, but why can't you just go down there and sign the deal and take a $100 million check and walk home? It's so, because we have done a lot of contracts, and I think if you ask any utility, Florida Power and Light being no exception to that, they have a lot of contractual agreements. If they were trying to sell their utility, they would have to go through a lot of these same gyrations because you don't exist in a void as you operate in the electric utility business. And so these contracts have to be taken almost one at a time. Plus you have third parties. We've recently filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They've got to give their blessing. The Public Service Commission's got to give their blessing. The Department of Justice has got to give theirs. I mean, there's 17 third-party groups that you have to go through in this exercise. And at the same time, I've got to go to the city council with the new bill that we received from our transactional attorneys, and they're catching the devil, why can't you close the deal? And it's one of those that I've advocated since I've been there. This is in for the long haul. If you can't go for the long haul, you don't need to be in trying to market the business.
Thank you.
Commissioner Russo?
You had mentioned you'd like to see something happening by January. Are there stumbling blocks that you're going through right now?
Yes, sir. The FMPA stumbling block is a major stumbling block. We have contracts with them, and I'm sure that if you look through some of yours, you may be in the same situation, that are based on bonds with the funding these utilities. And part of those bond issues are dealing with not only the tax-free, which we think, FMP does not agree with us at this point, subject to change, and hopefully we have some more tact that we're going to approach them with. that we can get past the IRS issue, and that's our major goal there. But then their attorney has brought up that you not only pledged your revenues, but you pledged your assets of your utility. We don't agree with that. The assets of the utility, we buy and sell bucket trucks on a regular basis, but they are trying to relate those assets as part of what they could liquidate if there was a bankruptcy. So you have that challenge that is being discussed. And so you have a lot of the legal issues that go back and forth. And in our particular case, we have the three-party scenario. I don't know about you, but it's like one of the frustrations I've had in this process. We wanted to write a letter to respond to an FMPA letter, but you had to get it approved by OUC, FDNL, and our attorneys. It took us 4 weeks to write a letter because all the attorneys had their own little paragraph that everybody had to work. So that's one of the frustrations, and it goes back to the timing issue, because in the process, it only takes one mistake and you expose, for example, the city of Vero Beach to multi-million-dollar issues 5 years down the road, and we want to make sure we don't do that. I mean, we're covering issues such as how far down does the power plant go? Do they just go to the foundation? Do they go below the foundation? We've talked about the environmental impacts. We have a provision in there where Florida Power and Light pays $500,000 for the, but we get to determine to what level we clean the site up. So those intricate little issues have got to be addressed. And in the FMPA issue, if for some reason somebody challenges that they cannot issue tax-free bonds in the future, then you put a lot of cities at risk. And so you've got to make sure you address those concerns.
Ms. Maxwell?
How have you dealt with the transition of the employees and pensions and all of that?
Part of our contract with Florida Power and Light, we were very concerned about the employees. We have a 2-year, I think it's 2-year or 3-year employment agreement. Two-year employment agreement for all employees that are attached to the electric utility. That goes even down to some of our customer service reps. Florida Power and Light has agreed to take over the pension obligations of those employees. They will be transferred into the Florida Power and Light pension program, which fortunately for us is equal to, in some cases, better than what we have. So our employees have little or no fear under that. And by and large, the employees in the electric department have not voiced any real major concerns because we have guaranteed those employment opportunities. And I think in many cases, they see it as a broader opportunity for them. Most of them will get pay raises even in the same job description they're in today. Now, we have not quit sending them to schools to make sure that they're kept up. One of the agreements we have with Florida Power and Light is that we have to maintain the utility at utility standards going forward, so when they have the acquisition of our utility, that it's in the same shape that we started in our negotiations, and that our employees are fully qualified to perform the functions.
Commissioner Rosa?
You had mentioned that you have Stanton at OUC, those